By now, it's pretty clear that something's wrong with our education system today. It's inefficient, outdated, it treats students as mechanical when they're not, it standardizes them when they're anything but standard, it compartmentalizes thought, and it compartmentalizes people. If people in general learn better by doing, experiencing, living, if the best way to get them to learn is to let them study what interests them, not teachers, to teach them how to think, not what to think about, then what the hell are we doing? There's a crisis in education, and education must be changed. But wait, before we go about casting off those chains and dismantling and restructuring the system, I think there's something that needs pointing out. These revolutionary new ideas, they're not so new. They're old. Not that old, but old. What if I were to tell you that these ideas have been out there for 40 years, 50 years, a century? That great minds have brought them up and come to our same conclusions.
The world is moving at a tremendous rate. No one knows where. We must prepare our children not for the world of the past, not for our world, but for their world, the world of the future.
What if I were to tell you that the future of education is its past? And that this future has been tried, and that it sparked, it sputtered, and then died out? What if I were to tell you that this revolution, like so many revolutions before, failed? Well, it did. But how? And why? Jumping back a bit, Dewey's progressive ideas were but the falling of small stones before an avalanche of revolutionary-minded ferment. After Sputnik in 1957, American educators got nervous that the American system wasn't enough to propel America into the future. On top of this, add the controversy of the Vietnam War and the revolutionary action it spawned. Educators like Postman and Weingartner, John Holt, Paulo Freire called for changes in the way that American students were educated. Some even said that school as an institution should be scrapped altogether. Free schools, open schools, schools without walls, all of which gave more control to students, were experimented with. For a brief instant, it looked like things were about to change. And then quicker than it started, the movement lost momentum, and by the mid-1970s it grinded to a halt. The traditional system prevailed, and has pretty much lasted to this day. Writing years later, Postman and Weingartner, in Teaching as a Conserving Activity, suggested some ideas for the decline of the reform movement. With the end of Vietnam, the revolutionary spirit of the movement lost steam. Postman also pointed out that most reformers of the day were aiming for this kind of educational utopia that was doomed from the get-go. And there was this trending reactionary back-to-basics movement in ed at the same time that stressed fundamentals and not the free, open, holistic ed of the progressives. And though it was far from perfect, it seemed like a better alternative than letting students run around the classroom all willy-nilly, choosing what to learn and how to learn it. All this would have been enough on its own, but then throw in the economic downturn in the mid-1970s after the oil shocks, and you have a real recipe for reverting to something familiar and safe. So by the mid-70s, the movement had all but fizzled out, and ed reform lay dormant for a while. But now, the crisis is being felt again. Will it be any different this time around? We're at war. Economic troubles are again very real, leading people to go the safe route. Gen Me is so sedated by everything else, and do they even care? Despite all this, there is reason to think there's hope for us in the future of ed. Sure, we're in similar conditions, but the world of today is so much different than it was in the 70s. Just think of the media and tech environment now. Info is cheaper than ever before, even free. Students have the tools to access and use this info right now and all the time. There's no longer a need to find a bright, utopian structure to replace the old rusty one, because the techno-informational structure is already there. We can exist within the system, work inside of it. We don't need to tear down the walls, because they're right for some people. We just need to make them more flexible and show students how they can use them. If we can do that, then there just might be some hope for the future of education after all.